Leicester, England, autumn 1998. Witness notes 20. After you have read these introductory paragraphs once, you can skip to the new old content here. If you are listening, then the timestamp is around the 2-minute 45-second mark. Introduction. The word settle to me carries connotations I am keen to avoid. I have never felt settled, or perhaps I cannot recall a time I felt settled. I do not feel settled now, writing this, and I've lived in the same house for 3.5 years. Without even discussing the obvious issues of colonisation, I just don't feel like I could or should settle. Better to keep my constituent parts shook up, agitated perhaps, rather than separating stagnant. Instead, I feel as though I have been travelling for years, maybe because I have not lived in my home nation of Scotland for 8.5 years. Perhaps because I know I won't stay here forever, or maybe because I carry that concept of home in a way which differs from many. More precisely, I still think of myself as a slow traveller, globally feral. Recently, I've been revisiting places through the photographs and words I recorded when my feet crossed their soil. This is a way of reminding myself of where I have been, not just in space and time, but in mind too. It is a wonderful thing to come out of below and rediscover myself through words I crafted, through the lens of a camera, when memory has wandered in the fog for too long. Thank you, past me. When I first started sharing letters with the world in this fashion 6 or more years ago, I usually began them with a vignette of where I was, a sort of travel diary mixed with nature observation, locking in the setting for the reader before I spoke of other things, and by so doing ensuring that place fed into the whole. It was a useful device for a reader and myself both, but as these letters were sent to so few readers, and now languish archived behind a paywall, I thought it a shame not to share these snippets again. As such, I am going to share a short series of these sketches accompanied by a photograph from that time, sent to you in date order, beginning with the second eldest. I shall include the above paragraphs in each of the letters in this series, but I shall also include a link at the very start so you can skip ahead once you are familiar with the above words. If you are listening and similarly want to skip, then the timestamp you want to navigate to will be in the same place. Taken without these paragraphs, each is a short read, and I hope you enjoy them. Leicester, England, autumn 1998. The following paragraphs were a big part of the genesis for my Witness Notes series, the idea of sharing vignettes from my life, whether things originally shared via my earlier letters years ago, or from former blog posts, my journals, notebooks, or memories. This one I shared on Substack Notes on Hogmanay, New Year's Eve 2025, and it planted the idea of sharing more. I have not shared it as a witness note as yet, as I thought it perhaps too long, but I think it is now time to do so. A long time ago, a generation or more, depending on whose definition of generation you take, of course, I found myself waiting for a train from Leicester to Derby. I was with my housemate, and we were, for all intents and purposes, cosplaying down and out in the Midlands of England. During that time, Orwell would have recognised our situation and circumstances and nodded, before returning to scrubbing his dishes or tramping along ancient routes circling and spiralling out from London town. On this day, we decided to risk the money for the train tickets and spend it in a bar near the station instead. At that time, we often had to choose between eating or drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes. Sometimes we'd espouse both in favour of cheap alcohol. The bar had a pool table, and because it was mid-morning and no one else was there, the barman let us play for 3. We bought pints of local bitter and a bag of crisps each for breakfast, and he seemed a benevolent sort, chatting amiably for a time, until he went to check the lines on a couple of barrels. We did not sit down. Those chairs and benches looked like they were heavily impregnated with the ash and tar of centuries. The smell, I'm sure some of you remember. I do not miss that. We were busy talking about whether we should somehow move to Berlin rather than Derby, how we needed more experience of different places to be able to write deeply, the richness which comes from travel and excitement, when the door opened and a man walked in. I'm sure you've probably met people like him, one look, and you know he is dangerous. Not the bluster and swagger of a gin swollen and terminally lacking in sense, but the danger which comes from actually being dangerous. He glanced around the room quickly, noting there was no barman looking us up and down, and that there was no one else there. We exchanged quick glances between ourselves, then said good morning and got back to the game at hand. Best to be polite. This man was not large, but he was wiry and carried himself with the surety of confidence and experience. "You here for the match?" he asked, as we tried our best to shrink and somehow disappear, looking at our still mostly full pints and knowing we could not leave immediately without risking offence. "No," we replied quickly in unison, waiting for a train back to Derby. We were not really interested in football, and proclaiming any foolish allegiance to a team in a bar near a railway station is not wise. We silently prayed he would simply let us be, especially as at that moment he took off his battered leather jacket and turned to the bar, showing the hilt of a knife in the back pocket of worn jeans. We thought we might have been saved by the return of a barman who clearly knew and respected this man, immediately pouring him a pint and a double of whiskey as a chaser. No money seemed to change hands. The man turned back to us and placed coins on the pool table. We couldn't leave now. He couldn't play himself after all. I think we both thought the same thing, maybe throw that match between us, lose, so as to not have to play the stranger. And I think we both came to the same conclusion. Better to play as well as we could, or we'd risk losing respect and setting us on a bad footing for what came next. He'd watched us both play already, after all, and in those days we were both rather good players, hours spent on the tables at university, the preceding years, days spent in bars. I've not played pool in a long, long time now. Strangely, I can't remember which of us won, but I do recall much of the conversation. At one point, he asked what we did, looked at us closely as he lit another hand-rolled cigarette from the dying butt of the last, obviously expecting something more than we work for a job agency, taking whatever sporadic, horrendous scraps and shit they throw our way. We answered honestly, "We're writers." He didn't bat an eyelid, just inhaled and exhaled, then in a cloud of old Holborn smoke took his shot. At another point, I'm not sure when, he took out his knife and placed it on the table to be able to better bend over and stretch to reach a cue ball. His hands were scarred and rough, tattooed and lived in. The barman watched us carefully, ignoring the knife, as the man continued the conversation. Tough game, writing. We exchanged glances again, familiar with the hardest job in the world sketch in the Fast Show, featuring Paul Whitehouse's character Archie the pub bore. What followed was surprising given how he looked and acted. Unlike Archie, he did not tell us he was a writer himself, but began to share advice on what he thought we should do, how we should approach writing in the world at large. It was wondrously sensible and carefully thought out. He talked about observation, about not missing a thing, about note-taking and diaries and journals, and he spoke of using these things in our fiction, my novels and my friend's scripts. He ended by talking about how we should ensure we have a strong nucleus of people we trust around us if we are to stand a chance of making a living with words, people who understand what it means to be a writer. He finished with telling us that if we were serious, we needed to get an agent, but to make sure we did our research first, find someone younger who was still ambitious enough to ensure they took chances and also represented us with heart, mind and soul. Eventually it came time to leave that pub and that man, after he bought us another drink, not listening to our protestations about not being able to afford to reciprocate. That he had appreciated the company and conversation, but looking back, I wonder how much of that conversation actually included us talking. He did most of it, and to this day I wonder who he was. What was his story? How did he know so much about what it meant to be a writer, both practically and also much, much deeper than that? I still remember the feel of his hand in mine as he shook it as we left, how strong and how sure it was. He genuinely seemed to have enjoyed our company. I'm not going to end this with a lesson. I've seen too many stories churned out by AI here which follow that pattern. The lesson, or lessons, plural, are already there above. What it will say is that this coming year I really think it is time I follow that last piece of his advice and find that agent. Whenever I've thought about an agent over the last few decades, I've always thought of that bar. and those pool games, and it feels good to write down this snippet of memory and finally share it. Finally, if you can afford to, there are currently 2 direct ways to support my work here. The first is to take out a paid subscription. The second way to support me here is to use my Ko-fi button link to send a tip of any amount. If you enjoyed this letter and wish to share it with others, please do so. I love it when someone shares my work. I also love it when you comment on a piece. Really, really love it. Thank you. Finally, many thanks for reading. I truly appreciate each and every one of you who does.